Chair of the committee. I want to thank all four of you, the witnesses, for coming in this afternoon to speak to us on a very important topic. This is the first session in our inquiry into the environmental and economic legacy of Wales's industrial past. And so we're looking forward to hearing about the environmental impact of heavy industry in Wales, the challenges and opportunities that this can bring. And we've got two panels of witnesses, so we've got the first panel in front of us this afternoon now. Before I ask you to introduce yourselves very briefly, could I ask members to declare any interest that they may have relating to this inquiry? No, none, that's fine, thank you very much. So the panel that's in front of us, could I ask you, starting from left to right, could I ask you to introduce yourselves very briefly, please, beginning with Anthony Collins?
Yep, my name is Anthony Collins, I'm from Coal Action Network, and I'm a policy campaigner there.
Daniel Turkson from Coal Action Network, Campaign Manager.
Diolch. Harf Elgar, Director of Friends of the Earth Cymru, Cyfeillion y Ddaear Cymru.
I'm Kirsty Love, Communications Officer for Friends of the Earth Cymru.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Let me start by asking all of you basically, but I'll start from left to right. Is there a clear understanding of the environmental legacy of the heavy industry in Wales? And I suppose if there isn't, why not? And if there is, what is it? And how does Wales compare to, say, the rest of the UK, other parts of the UK? Can I start with Anthony and I'll work along? Is that okay?
So I think this is a very, very large question. I can't really speak about how it compares to the rest of the UK. I'm not entirely across that, but others will be. So it's also rather than it being just a legacy, it's an ongoing issue as well. We have mining, which is ongoing. We have industries which are ongoing. Coal tip safety, which is ongoing. All of this stuff is not just, a legacy. As we put in our written evidence, it's a consistent story of for-profit companies making the most of Welsh resources for private profits, and leaving behind the nothing but environmental issues for the host communities, and leaving major problems for those host communities.
Thank you. Daniel Thurkelson.
Speaking just in relation to coal tips and open cast coal mines, I think that there's growing awareness of this legacy, but I think that there needs to be more information and a greater understanding, particularly in relation to open cast coal mine sites that have been under-restored, and I hope we will have more opportunity to talk about that in more depth later.
We will. Harf Elgar, please.
Thank you. And I can only speak relating to Wales as well, as that's our area of expertise. I think the wider context of Wales as a sort of powerhouse of the Industrial Revolution and the large heavy industries, coal and steel and slate and other related extractive industries. I think that sort of general context is well understood, that is what formed much of our infrastructure and communities in Wales, and that left obvious sort of scars on the landscape. I'm not sure if the interrelationship between the environmental and the social and cultural aspect and economic, so I'm glad that the committee is sort of looking at the issues together rather than purely environmental in terms of biodiversity or green spaces, that is sort of bringing all of these issues together. So I think that could be better understood. And also the ways the communities are still paying a price and this is still happening. I think sometimes it's seen as an issue of the past, of the 20th century and previously, whereas the impact on communities now of open cast sites that haven't been restored, of the coal tips, I think there's a bit more awareness of that because, of course, the tragic Abfan disaster, that has raised it in Welsh public consciousness and more awareness, and finally some action in the last couple of years underway with that. And then there are other areas which I'll leave to Kirsty to go into, but in terms of contaminated land, which is much less explored and much less is known. So I think it's a mixed picture.
Let me move on to Kirsty,
Yes,
please. Yes.
Yeah, and to build on what Harv is saying, with contaminated land, I think we're becoming increasingly aware that this is a problem. It's in the news more and more. There's podcasts, dramas, docudramas, and I'm sure some of you have probably seen the latest Netflix drama called Toxic Town about Corby and the terrible things that are happening there. So I think there is a growing public awareness that contaminated land is a problem. As Harvard said, we were an industrial powerhouse in the past. There's lots of our whole country is full of different kinds of sites. We've talked about coal tips and sort of ex-coal mines, but also there are landfill sites, and some of these are leaching very dangerous chemicals like cyanide, mustard gas, arsenic. And also there are, as I think there'll be other people talking about this, but metal mines. There are over 1,000 abandoned metal mines, particularly in West Wales, and they're really causing an issue, particularly with increased rainfall. On top of that, we've got toxic waste dumps, where companies in the past dumped very dangerous toxic chemicals. So we've got, lots of different kinds of sites that could be quite contaminated, but what we don't know is how much of a risk is it to us. And there will be some sites that are a lot more dangerous than others, and that's just something we don't know. So I think what we'd like to see is an inquiry to finding out about the impact and extent of contaminated land in Wales, and specifically how much of a threat is it to us. I think that's what communities really want to know. And so, for instance, an investigation on maybe monitoring populations that live very close to dangerous sites once we know what they are. So I think there's a bit of a knowledge gap at the moment, a growing awareness, but a knowledge gap in terms of contaminated land.
Absolutely, thank you. I'm going to move on to Simon Hall, please.
Thank you, Joan. I think this is probably directed to Ms Elgar and Mr Turkelson in the first instance, but we've obviously had recent UK and Welsh Government funding commitments on coal tip safety. There's a new bill obviously going through the Senate as well. What's your assessment with regards to how confident affected communities living near to dangerous coal tips should be that they will be safe and that this is going to be a job done properly? And what comfort should we as legislators here in Westminster have as well when those two announcements are married?
Yes, we're fully supportive of the Disused Mine and Quarries to Wales Bill, which currently at stage 1 in the Senedd, and we've given evidence there as well. I think communities are still very concerned and right to be so. Only at the end of last year with the storm we saw a landslip at Cwmtelery, which has meant that people have had to move out of their homes. So it's still a big concern. I think there have been great strides ahead in the last couple of years since the Tylerstown landslip, really, and we are pleased to see authorities, both Welsh Government and UK Government, local authorities, NRW, Mining Remediation Authority, all working together since that slip to realise that something must be done. We can't just wait for the next tragedy to happen. But we do feel that no single organisation has the capacity or the funding necessary to deal with it, and that's why we're pleased that a particular authority will be set up if this bill is approved by the Senedd, so that it can take an orderly approach to things and deal with the most dangerous tips and those that are of greatest risk to communities first. And
just on that, are you persuaded that the sort of timeliness of real-time monitoring, and particularly when overlays increased rainfall as a result of climate change, for example, the triaging is reliable in terms of that? My anxiety is always going to just be a little bit passive.
Yes, absolutely, and I think until the last couple of years it has been, or it hasn't been rigorous enough. That has, as we understand, stepped up now, but we do believe that we need the provisions in the bill, in the Senedd bill, in order to tighten that up and to increase the monitoring and get a programme of works in order as well, and to take the preventative approach. It's not about just dealing with things that are happening, but putting a programme of works in place in
effectively preventative and precautionary.
Preventative and precautionary, yes. So I think that would be the benefit of a new body. You mentioned the funding, of course, significant additional funding is necessary. The Welsh Government announced, I think, 34 million additional funding recently to deal with the current situations for local authorities and NRW. And we're pleased that the UK Government has recognised its historical responsibility, because all of these tips were created prior to devolution, of course. So we're pleased, there's been at least an initial payment of 25 million, but really one of our, calls for this committee and on the UK Government is to make sure the UK Government does provide more of that funding. We do think it's a responsibility on the UK Government to fund these works and to make dangerous tips safe. So, good start, but it's a bit of a drop in the ocean compared to what will be needed when the authority set up and we really get underway.
Mr. Tilson. Please.
You're right to ask the question whether the new bill will address the fears within those communities. I have spoken to a lot of people living in the shadow of these coal tips, and there is a real fear. Sometimes it's a fear that's not based on the reports of many of these tips do not have any stability issues associated with. There are no safety issues with these tips. It's not all of the tips, but there is nevertheless a fear there. And I think for that reason, it's really important that the bill's assessments of these tips are made public. At the moment, going through the Senate, there's a discussion about whether those assessments should be made public or should not be made public. I think it's really important that they are public so they deliver that benefit of reassuring those local communities. And
there'd be no point in doing it otherwise.
They say that it's accessible under FOI or EIR, but accessing documents through FOI requires a very specific skill set, really. It can be quite hard to access documents under that power. So we think that they should be, as a matter of course, put on the website and made as accessible as possible to those communities to deliver those mental health benefits and reassuring people that there are no stability risks from the coal tips near them, or that those stability risks are being monitored and addressed through maintenance works. You might be aware, but it's an estimated cost of 118 billion every year to UK economy for mental health. And this definitely affects the mental health of people living in the shadow of those coal tips.
It also surely affects things like property prices. It affects things like the confidence of local businesses to invest. If one is not entirely persuaded that as much is being done as possible, pro tem, to provide maximum security.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I suppose the next question is to Ms. Elgar and to Mr. Collins. But Mr. Collins, you sounded in answer to the chair's question, and forgive me if I got the wrong end of the thing, but sort of slightly spiritually antipathetic towards the private sector. Let me put it that way. So, but you have expressed concerns about the potential for private companies to extract and sell coal waste as part of the efforts to clean up coal tips, making that contribution. Now, if sites are fully remediated and the community safety, with all of the attendant benefits which previous answers have rightly identified, are delivered, why would that be a problem?
I would say that the key to this is the evidence. The past shows us that I have nothing personally against the private sector. It's the issues that have continuously shown. Daniel wrote and we released a report a few years ago which showed again and again that there is consistent issues in a mine. A company will come along and get permission to mine an area based upon based upon these commitments to remediate this land or do this.
With respect, my question was about the selling of coal waste as existing as well as extraction, so it wasn't just on the extraction point.
Okay, so the selling of coal waste.
Yeah.
Well, the issue of the selling of coal waste is obviously a climate one. We have a huge issue with that. I think in our written evidence that we supplied, we came up with a figure of around 600 million tonnes of coal possibly being in amongst coal tips around Wales, amongst the 2,500 plus coal tips around Wales. If that were to be sold and burnt, that creates a huge problem climate-wise. That's 1.6 billion tonnes of CO2 being released into the atmosphere if all of that coal is sold and burnt. Now, I don't think that all of that coal will be mined, and I don't think that all of that coal will be sold and all of that coal will be burnt. But we are in the situation that we are in terms of climate change, and we cannot afford for that coal to be sold with the threat that it will be burnt.
Let's just tease that for a moment, if we may. If the pressure to achieve the clean-up required an element of private sector involvement and private sector generated funds, is that a ditch where you think the whole process should die?
I think there are ways that tips can be remediated without mine being extracted from them for sale.
You flesh those out.
There are examples which unfortunately I don't have to hand. I've been told literally last night of one example and a couple of others of examples where that has happened. Someone else in this panel might actually have more of an idea of those. But yeah, where remediation has happened, where
well, maybe Chair, you could write to us on that. On that issue. Ms. Elgar, what's your thought on that?
The intention of the Senate bill is to focus on human welfare and making the site safe, not full restoration or remediation. So I think that there is a...
They go hand in hand, really, don't they?
Sorry?
They go hand in hand, really.
I think a full restoration or remediation would imply, clearing coal would imply taking coal from the site. A sort of human welfare approach to make sites safe could be a case of reprofiling the area, drainage, rather than removing the coal from the site. But we are concerned that a sort of unintended consequence of this could be to stimulate remining and to create a new coal industry in Wales, and as Anthony outlined, we're not in favour of that, largely because of the climate change impacts. The extraction of coals wouldn't be consistent with Wales's climate emission targets and carbon budgets, and would significantly impact the UK's 2035 climate target and the global climate leadership. So we cannot afford to start a new coal industry in Wales, and it could be really significant in terms of the number of tips. So possibly unscrupulous private actors, maybe I'll say, rather than private sectors as a whole, could try and take advantage of the situation and the fear of people and communities in order to try and kick off a big industry, and we don't believe that's the direction the Wales should be going in or any other country in the world if it comes to that.
Just on that point, given the, this is not a criticism, given the correct tightness of the regulatory environmental environment in which companies now operate across the sector and indeed across the United Kingdom, whilst there may be motivations to be unscrupulous, the actual opportunity to operate in an unscrupulous way is surely now, at scale, narrowed down to the point of imperceptibility.
We might hope that is the case. That's not the evidence that we see in the communities that we work with across the coal fields in South Wales. We're still seeing applications from companies for further open-cast mining at Glanlash in Carmarthenshire.
That doesn't make them unscrupulous, does it? That makes them seeking a permission. That doesn't make you unscrupulous.
Okay. No, I won't use the words unscrupulous to describe the companies that I'm talking about, but they're taking advantage of situations, and as we see in areas like Fosafran, in Merthyr Tydfil, there's a company there that mined the coal for 17 years. They're given planning permission to do so in order to remediate the site, and they're now putting in a proposal not to do that and to leave the community with a massive dangerous hole and create 3 new coal tips. I don't know if Daniel has
I just want, just in the interest of time, Jared, let just turn to the last question in the section that we just wanted to cover. That's
I'm going to bring Daniel in because he wanted to answer.
Oh, forgive me.
No, that's fine. I would just, I guess, reinforce the point that mining and selling this coal would drive the very climate change that's destabilising these coal tips. And it would lead to, this isn't just a pile of coal that's laying on the surface. This is coal that's mixed in, up to quantities of like 15%, but generally lower, mixed in with colliery spoil, with rocks and soil. So it requires a lot of earth moving to extract this coal. A lot of that would be unnecessary, even when you're remediating that coal tip. And that generates a lot of dust that would be to the detriment of surrounding communities that have already suffered the original coal mining. So this is not without cost to extract that coal to a sort of purity to then sell it. There'd be coal washing, there'd be HGVs on and off of the site. It is in almost every regard the same as a coal mine, to mine the coal tips. It is not simply scooping the coal off the surface and selling it. So I guess I just want to emphasise that point there.
Yeah, no, I'm sure the committee was aware of that. Let me just ask you about local authorities. Obviously, great receptacles of expertise and local knowledge. How do you assess both their expertise and capacity to undertake coal tip remediation? And I think possibly just one answer to that, given time, if somebody can give some sort of definitive.
I think it's clear that no local authorities have the capacity and the funding necessary to deliver on these. There is some expertise, certainly like from the Clontarf that's dealt with the Tylerstown slip, certainly has developed expertise. But that's not the case across all of the impacted authorities, and obviously with austerity there have been cuts to local government time after time, which in some cases means that they've had to cut jobs that brings in that expertise.
You would want us to warn against, I suppose, sleepy shoulders of the centre, either Westminster or Cardiff, passporting these duties off to local councils.
Yes, certainly. We believe it's a better approach for all the public authorities involved to work together, and for this new authority to be set up in order to be able to have that expertise and be able to supply it to different situations.
Thank you, Chair.
And Davies, please.
I'm going to do a very quick follow-up before I go on to Fosafran and Land Lash, which is within my constituency. £600 million has been branded about. Doesn't seem a lot to me for the number of coal tips that we've got within Wales. So just very quickly, do you think it's enough? And how has that figure, is that a figure that's been calculated by some sort of formula, or do you think it's a figure that seemed a lot at the time, but when you look into it and dive down into it, it really doesn't touch the surface? Perhaps I'll ask Daniel, actually, before I go on to Fosafran.
Yeah, absolutely. We have the figure from a member of the Senate that used that figure in the Senate, that 600 million. We think that things have probably evolved since then. We've had more clarity on the disused mines and tips bill that's coming through the Senate, and it's likely to be an ongoing cost. That bill ostensibly creates a monitoring regime by which tips can be monitored and maintenance works occur. That's going to be an ongoing cost rather than a simple throw a lot of money at it in the beginning and then you're done forever. We think that's the right approach. We don't want to see all of the coal tips flattened. There are unique ecologies that have grown up around many of those coal tips over the last 40, 50 years. And many of them don't pose a sort of safety challenge if they are properly and robustly monitored and inspected.
Thank you. So to have and Daniel then, I'm sorry, you seem to be having the vast majority of these questions, I'm sorry. As I said, Glanlash is within my constituency, Force of Ran, we all know what's happening there. I find it very difficult actually that people are having planning permissions for open cast collieries and then are not doing the remediation work in order to put that landscape back as they should have done. And despite promising to do so, despite it being a planning condition, you know, so all the safeguards are there, and yet they're still not doing that work. So what safety and environmental risks do those sites now pose in their current state?
In the case of Foss of Ram, we have very serious concerns about the safety risks associated with the new plan to massively downgrade that promised restoration. That was a restoration that the company agreed, Merthyr South Wales Limited agreed with the council in 2015, that's Merthyr Tydfil County Borough Council. The company has now, after 15 years of mining and an extra 15 months of illegal mining after planning permission ran out, they've reneged on that, and they have submitted a new application that is 85% reduction in terms of the cost involved, despite the fact that their most recent company accounts do show that they have set that money aside for restoration, 91.2 million, that would fund the original restoration. They are refusing to do so, which comes back to kind of unscrupulous behaviour that people touched on earlier. The risks include leaving 3 colossal coal tips behind that between them comprise 37,000 cubic metres of soil and colliery waste, including metals that are leaching out of that right now, and that's recorded in the company's own EIA. A huge body of water with a capacity of over 1 million cubic metres of mine water, and an exposed coal face that rises up as a cliff face. There will be issues of people swimming in that mine water, it being very deep and very cold. One quarry in North Wales alone has had 20 deaths since 1992. So that poses a real risk, as well as people leaping from that cliff into the water body below, with dirt bikes going up and down the coal tips that will be left in situ. That was one of the problems that the coal mine was actually seeking to address, was dirt bikes, and now they're proposing to build a massive motocross rally on top of one of those coal tips that should have been returned to the void. The money's there, but the company's refusing to do it, and that's the kind of behaviour that we have seen such a strong pattern of. Celtic Energy is probably another name that's known to some of the members around this table, who left 4 coal mines unrestored at the end of their tenancy. So we don't trust these companies to deliver the kind of restoration for coal tips. It's the same companies involved, and that's why we think it needs to be driven by the public sector that have the interests of the local communities at heart.
Thank you. Harv?
Yeah, we're really concerned about all the open cast sites that haven't been properly restored, and East Pit and Margam and Park Slip are amongst others where residents are just really worried and still campaigning for them to be made safe. As you said, Glanlash is another planning application in now, and so that's still a live issue. And you can see in the people's reactions and responses on the council websites, it's really telling how people want that site to be restored. They want it back so that they can use it for it to be part of nature, and really concerned about the lorries coming going, as well as the coal that will be taken from that site. And with Force of Ran, both Kirsty and I and others have been up in Merthyr in recent weeks, supporting the local community there, and sort of doing information sessions and talking to people in Merthyr Town Centre about the situation. And there's a mix of anger and distrust of the company, but also now of public authorities. They just feel they've been let down half the time and exploited, and the coal's gone, the money's gone, and they're left with the situation that Daniel described of a massive void filling with polluted water and a cliff edge, and really worried about the safety of their children, teenagers going up there in the summer, and feeling just totally let down by everyone involved, really.
Water is a magnet for our teenagers in the summer, isn't it? They seem to be drawn to it, even though, we all know that they shouldn't do it, but, you can't stop them, really, even by fencing off. We've had one tragedy in Llanderby a few years ago, and nobody wants to go there, I can tell you. Just one very, very quick question. How can we stop this? How can we stop mining within Wales, really, and how can we have a ban, really, for coal tips to be introduced in Wales? Just to finish off my bit, if I may.
So what we propose is, obviously the government has announced late last year the plan to ban coal mine licensing. We believe that within that legislation, there should be the ability to ban the act of extraction as well. So whether that be just banning the act of extraction, or whether that be the act of coal extraction, regardless of whether that is in a coal seam or outside of a coal seam, require a license, and then that license be part of the licensing ban. That's the way that we see putting an end to coal mining in the UK and Wales.
And quickly and then I promise.
Just to add to that, because I think we need a belt and braces approach, given everything we've learned from communities and seen in practice. So the Welsh Government's current coal policy is intended to no longer have coal mining in Wales. That's their policy intention, but of course we're seeing companies use these loopholes or try and find their way around, and obviously very concerned about the potential with coal tips as well. So as well as the proposal that Anthony explained, we believe we also need the Welsh Government to prohibit coal extraction for commercial gain. That could potentially be done by the bill currently going through the Senedd around coal tips, or it could be a separate proposal, but we feel, despite the policy intention, the clear energy and coal policy in Wales, there are still loopholes there, they're still being exploited, so we do need a clear ban in law in Wales as well as the licensing issue.
Thank you. John.
Yeah, I'm going to make a plea for brief answers because I'm conscious we've got a lot to get through. Yeah, Simon Hall, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to ask where the balance falls. I think, Mr. Thirkelson, you mentioned it a moment or so ago. Sometimes the creation and establishment of what I would describe as sort of accidental habitats, parcels of land used, left undisturbed, and Mother Nature fills the vacuum. When talking about remediation, which can often be very significant in scale, where and when a tension arises between accidental habitat creation and its preservation and the safety of communities, etc., where does the balance get struck? Who has the whip hand, or which issue has the whip hand?
Happy to answer that. Our perspective that safety always comes first. The safety of communities has to be the priority. Ecology is really important, and where remediation is required to stabilise, or safety works are required to stabilise coal tips, that should be done with sensitivity to the ecology, as is required by any planning application. But safety has to take a priority.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Andrew Ranger, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to move on to a bit more detail to look at contaminated land, if possible, and Kirsty, if I may. How effective is the contaminated land regime in practice across Wales?
Right, yes, well, I think one of the major issues, just keeping it short, is there just isn't the funding there. And I think that makes it very hard for local authorities to fulfill their duties under the contaminated land regime. We've done some research and we found out that the registers, contaminated land registers, are not really being maintained. Some don't have them at all. It's the same with the inspection strategies. So a lot of councils don't appear to have a strategy, or they're not keeping it updated. And I don't think that's because they don't want to. I think it's just they don't have the resources, they don't have the money to be able to do it. So I think one big issue is that we need to have funding restored back so that contaminated land officers can do their job.
Okay, thank you. And is that the same reason? So in your written evidence, you noted that the number of recorded sites seems suspiciously low, so that's the reason for that?
That's it. Yeah, it's quite complicated. In our research, we found evidence of potentially contaminated sites, a lot of them, but they didn't find their way onto the registers. And there's a lot of reasons for this. Sometimes they're just not being inspected, and I think this is a huge issue. And I think there was some BBC research that confirmed what we found out, that 9 out of 10 toxic sites are not being inspected. And that's just awful across England and Wales. And so I think that's partly the issue. Also, I think the planning regime is being used rather than with contaminated land regime. You can either use the EPA, the Environmental Protection Act Part 2A, or you can use the planning regime. And there are problems with that as well, with, because in councils, I think there isn't the funding there. It's very hard on the people that are responsible for the contaminated land to get the funding they need to do their job, to be able to, scrutinise applications when they come in. So I think the big question mark is of when sites are being developed on contaminated land, are we confident that the remediation is taking place? Is the money there to ensure that it's taking place? And that's what I worry about. So we need more funding.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. Steve Witherden, please.
Thank you, Chair. Questions also for Ms Duff. You've identified a particular concern with forever chemicals, such as PCBs dumped in landfill sites, former quarries, left at old chemical plant sites. How prevalent is this problem across former industrial sites in Wales? And do you feel we're fully aware of the extent of the problem?
I think, as I said before, there's a huge information gap. PCBs, forever chemicals, and they're still around, and they've been found everywhere. They're even been found in the deepest oceans and in the Arctic. So they can travel, and they do, and they persist for a very, very long time, hence their name. I don't think we know exactly how prevalent they are, but we do. There are certain sites in the UK where these PCBs were dumped. There was quite often in South Wales, there's T-Fluid, there's Kevin Mawr up in Wrexham, and other places, Brofiskin. There are these, toxic waste dumps, and some of those sites have fears that that the caps are not working effectively. In Brofiskin, there's a clay cap in T-Fluid, but that leaches out every so often, actually leaches out onto a woodland. So I think the question is, we need to find out. We don't have that information, but we definitely need to find out, because these are quite dangerous chemicals.
Okay. Can move on to Claire Hughes, please.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up to that, if I could then, Kirsty? So in terms of PCBs, as you know, there's growing awareness of them, but you just talked there about a data gap in terms of not knowing really what's going on. Like, how seriously do you think that we are taking the risk that these chemicals pose to communities who are living in sites such as those you've just mentioned?
I don't think we're taking it seriously enough at all. I visited a community up in the north of Caerphilly, and they're absolutely terrified. They're really scared about their soil. They won't grow vegetables in the ground. They'll grow them in pots. They talk about when they were in the woodland and seeing, sort of purple swirly liquid and black jelly. So people are concerned. We don't know whether there's, how much of a right they are to be concerned. We don't know. We need the information. But people are really concerned, and we need to take those concerns seriously, because these are really, really dangerous chemicals. And in the US, the companies have been, sort of paid lots in compensation. So it's a huge issue, and I think we need to start taking it more seriously.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I suppose in terms of looking forward, And thinking about the UK government rather than the Senate, which I appreciate the bill's going through the Senate at the moment, what further action do you think the UK government could take to safeguard the environmental legacy across Wales? Just a brief sentence, just one thing that they could do, perhaps. If I start with Anthony Collins, please.
I'm not sure, to be honest. Other than funding, giving more funding. Sorry, was the question across Wales or across the UK?
Just Wales, yeah.
Yeah, I'd say providing more funding. We've had that figure of £600 million that's been given before. I'm not sure where that is, whether that needs updating. But yeah, it comes back to more funding.
Thank you. Daniel.
I think logistically, as well as in funding, support the proper restoration of the under-restored coal mine sites that still litter the South Wales landscape. And to quote one person who lives near one of those sites, it's like the moon, like Mars. All we're asking for is to restore it to some sort of semblance of what it was prior. That's David that lives next to Margam Park Slip. So it's not just about coal tips, it's also about those open cast, virtually unrestored coal mine sites.
Thank you.
Yes, totally agree. Unfortunately, call for funding, but it is much needed, and we do feel it's UK government's responsibility. But also the proposal that Anthony mentioned earlier about including remined coal in the forthcoming legislation on the UK coal ban with contaminated land, and I'll let Kirsty go into this. It does feel like we're in a very different position, and an earlier position maybe where we were with coal tips some years ago, where we actually need all authorities to work together and need a public inquiry, and that can come from all authorities working together, so it doesn't have to be led by UK government, but we do feel it is sort of a wider issue that does benefit from attention at a UK level as well.
Thank you. And finally, Kirsty, please.
Carv's just said it. Sorry. No, it's fine. Funding, obviously, but also we just don't know what lies beneath our feet, and we don't know how much that is affecting our health and the health of the animal kingdom. So this information gap we really need to address, and what the UK government could do is to have an investigation to assess the scale and impact of contaminated land, and as part of that, the health impacts as well of people that live really close to these dangerous places.
That's very helpful. I just want to say thank you to all four of you for taking the time to come before the committee today. It's much appreciated seeing you here in person. And I'm now going to briefly suspend the session before we go on to panel 2, order.